Hey everyone, welcome to Module 3, Section 6, Why Sharing is a Foundation of Discipleship. And so in this video, we're going to be talking about the very evident call of a Jesus follower to share the story of Jesus with the people around them, and how sharing is then foundational to our discipleship. And in the first half of this module, Laura described how listening is a foundation of discipleship. And then you had some field work that required that you simply just sit with people to listen to their story. And so while listening is most certainly, it's going to take you very far in relationships and helping you, help people know and love Jesus, it can only take you so far. Because the other half of discipleship is actually sharing, which sounds about right, doesn't it? But see, most of us know that we have to share the gospel. That's a part of our calling. This, however, is the very reason that we started this module with listening instead of sharing, because I'm willing to bet that most of you probably don't struggle to know that sharing is important. But you may not have seen how listening is on the same field. But here's the real point of the second half of this module, because while I'm sure that we all may know that sharing the gospel is important, we may not actually know why, or more likely, we struggle actually to know how to share the gospel and with whom. And so that's what we want to dig into in this unit, in this section. I want to ask just a question for you to ponder for a second as you're listening. What is the gospel? I know that there are other units at Lipscomb that cover that. We've talked about some of that in this unit as well, but the gospel is the good news of Jesus' conquering of death and raising to life so that you and I and everyone else can have access to a relationship with God. I mean, isn't that the gospel? I think it's probably most of it, right? But that definition, which is honestly the way that I'm sure you heard it, I always heard it growing up, falls a little short of what the gospel is in my mind. Because in truth, yes, the gospel is the good news that Jesus conquered death to bring us life with God, but he also conquered death and rose to life to bring justice to the world. You can look all over Scripture that God is a God of justice. In the Minor Prophets, God calls out the wickedness of the way that the nations were treating their own people, and he calls for justice to be done, not injustice. See, justice is about correcting everything that is wrong, right? Racism is wrong. Inequality is wrong. All the isms are wrong. Justice seeks to step into those places to correct the wrongs of injustice. And that word used in the Old Testament for justice almost always also meant righteousness. And so a just world is one in which everything is right the way God intended for it to be. Sin breaks the righteous world that God created, and so Jesus came to bring justice and righteousness back into reality through the sacrifice of the cross. Okay, see, to me this is really good news, because it means that part of my role as a follower of Jesus is to work sacrificially to bring justice to my city, not necessarily by the rule of law, but by the intention of God for all things. Okay, that may have sounded like a little bit of a sidebar moment, but that to me is the gospel. Jesus' love and compassion for humanity, causing him to sacrificially give himself up so that you and I could be lifted up to a relationship with God, which changes not just the place that I end up, the places that we end up, but changes the way that I operate in the world around me, to bring the same level of sacrificial goodness to the people around me. See, the gospel has both spiritual and physical outcomes to it. The gospel offers forgiveness of sin and the ability to be with God forever, and it also works to rid the world of pain and suffering that sin caused. And so we have to ask again, why is sharing a foundation of discipleship? Because you're telling people the most important truth of our humanity. That we can't reach the goodness and life that we all long for on our own. But hope is not lost, because Jesus can get us there. And here is what that looks like and means for your life. And then you share your story with Jesus. And that's what sharing is all about. You know, in my church for the last couple of years, we have been unpacking life with Jesus. We actually had a video on this very idea in the first module. Life with Jesus means living into a love that sacrificially works to shape and change the landscape of our world. And we don't participate in those things because it brings us fame or recognition. We participate in bringing goodness to the world because of Jesus and the hope that He brings to all people. In the basic biblical beliefs video, Laura talked about one of our basic biblical beliefs from Jeremiah 29, where God tells His people who are living in exile to basically work for the good of the city, right? Plant gardens, build homes, pray for the prosperity of the city. See, we believe that our calling as followers of Jesus is to work for the good of all people. Bringing goodness to people is a part of sharing the gospel story, because the gospel brings goodness to all people. You know, as we are sharing the gospel, what we are doing is inviting people into a portion of your story or of my story with God, so that then they can catch a glimpse of what life with God is all about. And the truth is that we also are sharing with them the reality of life with Jesus, right? And look, do things all magically get better when you become a follower of Jesus? Will you never again struggle, never fight with your spouse or your kids, never do or say the wrong thing at the wrong time? Are you going to lose family, friends, jobs, homes perhaps? Somewhere along the way in our sharing of the gospel, we convinced people that it was better, life with Jesus was better, because you would never experience all those bad things in life that you did before Jesus was a part of your life. But this is simply not the gospel that we share. We are not about sharing a health and wealth or a prosperity, cultural, selfish gospel. We share the truth of the gospel, that what Jesus offers right now in your life is to never again be alone, to always have Jesus with us to help us navigate all of the difficulties and challenges that are still going to happen even if you're a follower of Jesus. And so how exactly do we share the gospel with other people? I think first and foremost, it's an issue of us, of you and me, living our lives with Jesus. One of the greatest tools that we have at our disposal to share the gospel is our own lives. The more people see your life of faith, the more they will have a framework for why and how it could be important in their lives. Peter, in his letter to the Christians that were living in persecution, says this in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. He says, "Live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us." See, there's a truth of your beliefs and faith that are exposed by people just simply watching you, which honestly can feel a little bit scary if you think about it, right? You're speaking the story of Jesus by the way that you live your life. This means that you and I have an expectation to live with Jesus in all things. In our work, in our fun, relationships, play, and so much more. The reality is that the content of our lives will most often speak louder than our words. So we should make sure that our lives actually do match what we say. So that's the first way that we share the gospel. We live our life with Jesus in all things. The second way that you share the gospel is by using actual words. I know that comes as a surprise, right? But you knew it was coming. You eventually do have to speak to people about your faith in Jesus. You know, while our lives are certainly great at sharing the gospel, we cannot and should not simply rely on people seeing our faith in action as the means to hearing the gospel story. You have to eventually use words, right? We're going to talk in a few videos from now about some tools that you can use to share the gospel by asking, just really good questions, by making statements of faith. But ultimately, you need to know why you have faith in Jesus and be able to articulate that in a relatively simple and brief way. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had someone ask you why you are a Christian, or why you believe the things that you believe. If you haven't had this happen to you already, then I promise you somewhere along the way, this is going to happen. It happens to everybody. So how do you respond? Do you ask people to give you a minute while you pull out your paper on the gospel that you wrote for a grad class somewhere along the way? Do you speak to people like they are grad students? No, most of the time, if someone asks you why you believe what you believe, then you're going to have probably at max 5 minutes of their undivided attention to do so. Most of the time, though, it's a bit shorter than even 5 minutes. And so are you able to tell people the story of your faith in Jesus in under 5 minutes? See, this is where some of your basic biblical beliefs will come in handy, because there are portions of Scripture that have become your way of understanding God. And those basic biblical beliefs will help you formulate what you say in a very clear way, right? You can say something like, the gospel to me is the hope of Jesus' pursuit of all things, to restore all of creation back into the intention of God. Or you could say something like, look, I believe in Jesus because everywhere I go, I see the result of Him with me, shaping and changing things in and around me. Whatever it is, sharing the gospel most often does not mean giving a doctoral thesis on the story of Jesus. Most often it means telling people the most fundamental parts of your story with Jesus and why that has been good for you in your life. You know, I tend to believe that people latch on to a story. Story is how we tell the history of our lives, right? It's how we make sense of our lives. And so if you are telling the gospel story and you fail to tell your story in the story of Jesus, then most people will immediately forget it. See, we are all impacted by and through people's stories. So don't forget to tell your story in the sharing of the gospel. So listening and sharing are both foundations of discipleship, because they allow you to hear people and become curious of their stories, so that then you can point out the places of their story where Jesus has been all along the way.